when you picture the Russian Civil War, what do you see? Yeah, chances are you're seeing two colors, red versus white. This huge, continent-spanning struggle, but a pretty simple one at its core. It's a story we all learn, right? From 1917 to 1922, it was Lenin's Bolshevik Reds fighting the counter-revolutionary whites, all for the soul of Russia. A clean, two-sided war that basically carved out the rest of the 20th century. But that simple story just completely misses the absolute chaos on the ground. We're talking about a total free-for-all with peasant armies that were fighting everyone and this lost legion of foreign soldiers who accidentally conquered Siberia just by trying to get home. Okay, let's dive in and unpack the real multicolored story. So let's start with the Reds. When the Bolsheviks took power, they had a revolution, sure, but they didn't really have an army. What they had were ideals. And as we're about to see, those ideals were on a direct collision course with the cold, hard reality of war. And what's so fascinating here is just how huge the gap was between the dream and the reality. I mean, the Bolshevik ideal, it was a volunteer socialist militia where officers were elected by their own men, no harsh discipline, nothing like that. But Lev Trotsky, the guy in charge of winning this thing, he knew that a dream wasn't going to stop a bullet, so he brought in mass conscription, iron discipline, we're talking the death penalty, and in a move that honestly shocked everybody, he hired tens of thousands of old Tsarist officers to command this new Red Army. He wasn't building a militia, he was forging a weapon. This quote from John Kelsey just absolutely nails it. See, Trotsky's goal wasn't to be ideologically pure, it was to win. And if that meant using the brutal methods of the very same Tsarist regime they had just overthrown, well, so be it. For him, the survival of the revolution totally trumped the ideals of the revolution. All right, let's add another color to our map, green. Because while the Reds and the Whites were busy battling for control of the cities and the railways, a completely different, and you could argue much more brutal war was exploding across the vast Russian countryside. This was the Peasants' War. So, what sparked this fire? Well, it all comes down to a policy called war communism. The Bolsheviks desperately needed to feed their new army and the starving cities, so they sent armed squads into villages to take grain by force. Lenin himself called it a merciless and terroristic struggle. So you can just imagine how the peasants felt about that. This policy didn't just ask for a fight, it guaranteed one. And the scale of this peasant resistance was just immense. I mean, forget about small, scattered gangs. This number right here, that's for just one of these movements, the so-called Tambov Blue Army, 250,000 strong. And I gotta be clear, this was not some minor sideshow. This was a massive, bloody front in the Russian Civil War. And the fighting, it was savage on a scale that's just hard to comprehend. The brutality went both ways. Green partisans would capture communists and literally crucify them with railway spikes. In response, the Red Army used mass executions and even poison gas to crush these rebellions. The war against the Greens was eventually won by the Reds, but the cost was a catastrophic famine that killed millions. It was a victory won in a wasteland. Now, if you think a three-way war between Reds, Whites, and Greens sounds chaotic, well, buckle up, because we're about to get to one of the most bizarre, most incredible chapters in all of military history. The story of an army with no country that conquered a continent by accident, all while just trying to get home. Meet the Czechoslovakian Legion. Okay, so these were nearly 60,000 former prisoners of war, totally stranded deep inside Russia after it dropped out of World War I. They were an army without a nation, thousands of miles from the sea, surrounded by pure chaos. All they wanted to do was get to the port of Vladivostok on the Pacific coast and catch a boat home. Simple, right? Well, here's how it all went down. The Bolsheviks originally said, sure, we'll give you trains to the coast. But the journey was super tense, and things finally boiled over after a brawl in a town called Chelyabinsk, and an enraged Trotsky ordered the Legion to be disarmed. Big mistake. Huge. The Legion fought back, and in just a few stunning weeks, these soldiers, who were only trying to leave, had seized control of the entire Trans-Siberian Railway, the single lifeline crossing all of Russia. They had just opened up a 1,000-mile front in a war they never, ever wanted to fight. And this brings us to the summer of 1918, which was the absolute rock bottom for the Bolsheviks. Suddenly, they weren't just fighting the Whites anymore. They were completely surrounded.
And this slide, wow, it just lays out the absolute nightmare scenario for Lenin and Trotsky. Just look at this. You've got the Czechs holding the railway, cutting them off to the east. You've got the White armies pushing from the south. You've got the Green peasants rising up right in their heartland. And to top it all off, British, French, and American troops are now landing in the north and the far east. I mean, every direction they looked, an enemy was staring back. The revolution was hanging by a thread.
And just when you think this story can't possibly get any stranger, check this out. While they were fighting their way across an entire continent, the Legion founded its own bank. A bank, seriously. They used it to fund their operations, pay their soldiers, and even restart local industries to get supplies. This wasn't just a rogue army. It was a mobile, self-sufficient state just chugging along the rails, an army with its own treasury department. It's absolutely incredible.
So somehow, against all those odds, the Bolsheviks held on. They defeated the whites, they brutally crushed the greens, and they outlasted the foreign powers. They won. But that victory came at a staggering cost. The state that crawled out of this chaotic, multicolored war wasn't the one they had promised. It was something harder, colder, forged in the absolute furnace of survival.
So let's just pull back for a second and look at the whole picture. As this table makes really clear, the Russian Civil War was never a simple red versus white duel. It was a chaotic, four-dimensional conflict. You had the Reds clinging to power at any cost. You had the Whites, this fragile alliance of basically anyone who was anti-Bolshevik. You had the Greens, peasants fighting simply to protect their own land. And then you had the Czechoslovakian Legion, an army without a country whose only real goal was to get out.
And this brings us to the final, crucial question. The Bolsheviks won the war, there's no doubt about that. But to win, they had to build a state on coercion, on terror, and on the absolute centralization of power. So, did they save their revolution, or did they sacrifice it? Was the ruthless, authoritarian Soviet Union that emerged from this crucible the victory they had fought for, or was it the ultimate price of their survival?